بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد سيد الأولين والآخرين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. We praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We send peace and blessings upon the beloved Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, upon his family, his companions, and those who follow them until the end. This is a class that few people requested, including I think to be my folks as well, that we already sort of were thinking about also, that I teach in other places, because after 9/11, like historically, the pressure of 9/11 that was put on compelled us to like focus outwardly. To an extent that we may have lost our identity a little bit in all that. Because if you get too far detached from your base, and then you kind of make the focus, this is kind of one of the challenges of white America, right? That they become so enamored with trying to appease it that they lose themselves. So what I noticed in the last maybe 20 years, and I was out of the country for 10 of those 20, was that there wasn't like a lot of focus on like educating Muslims. So it was like, let's tell the non-Muslims about Islam, let's tell the non-Muslims about Islam, but what about telling and educating Muslims? So I thought about this course like a long time ago, introducing Islam to Muslims, because oftentimes we're not able to ask questions about things that maybe are like very fundamental. And then the second thing, in order to maintain the trust of our religion, we have to stay close to it. And you know, the dunya is a thick, deep place. And if I don't have certain skill sets, I can drown in that thing. And there's a lot of challenges, right? A lot of like I'm supposed to do this show for Netflix, right? So they sent me the interview that I did for them about the Boston bombing. So the questions that they asked me on the Boston bombing, not Netflix, but are very different than the questions they sent me. You know what I mean? Like the questions they asked me on the phone were like very friendly. They weren't presumptuous. The questions they sent me are like, so can you help us understand the mind of someone who would want to commit terrorism? How am I supposed to know that? Right? But the assumption is that I know. So it's important that we are at a point where we are anchored enough within our faith, in our community, in our family, that we don't, as Malcolm talked about, get bamboozled. And we don't get caught up in the veneer of even access and utility that may be afforded to us if we compromise. And that's a challenge. If you to kind of get at what I'm saying, when I came back from Egypt, I received a phone call. This is when I lived in the Bay Area, San Francisco, from the individual who claimed to represent a wealthy donor who was not Muslim, who wanted to create content providers in the Muslim community. So was offering me financial support if I would be trained by his folks and then not talk about 4 issues. So I just played it out. I wanted to know who these people were. So I said, really, what are the 4 conditions of your patronage? He was like, number 1 is, do not encourage Muslims to get involved in politics. Like, do not allow themselves to be located politically in America as a viable force. What kind of community would not want to, at least engage, at least locally? The second thing was, do not talk about Palestine. Don't talk about the occupation of Palestine. Don't talk about Kashmir. Don't talk about Rwanda. Don't talk about these kind of things that are happening in the Muslim world. Specifically, don't talk about the occupation of Palestine. The fourth thing was don't talk about Islam's stance on sexual morality. Like, don't take a position. So then I said to him, you know, this is kind of like crazy. Right? This is like something out of a movie. You know, what happens like if I don't agree? And this is what they told me. You will forcibly isolate you from the Muslims. These are not Muslims. And I was like, how are you going to do that? And I swear to God, they told me, look at Siraj. Imam Siraj is the Imam. And I said, you have purposely tried to push Imam Siraj out of leadership as a Black American man. Do you see like how problematic this is for a community that you don't even, like, you've never been to a mosque. You've never sat on the floor with like uncles and aunties. Like, you don't know our community. And they're like, well, that's what we're interested in. So I said to them, well, alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has preserved Imam Siraj Wahaj in the hearts of the Muslims, alhamdulillah. And I disrespectfully your offer. But the point is that there are people who even function with the promise of access. That if we're not grounded in family and community and in a sense of orthodoxy, we may be deceived by that access. So what I noticed is that there was a lack of foundationalism within the Muslim. There was a lack of teaching Islam to Muslims. That should be we should learn first. The second thing is that as America becomes more and more secular, there's a great article in Atlantic, I think 2 weeks ago, on political puritanicalism. Like, now the Puritans are no longer religiously oriented, they're politically oriented. So the religion, Vincent Lloyd, great theologian, talks about how the nomenclature of politics has replaced religion in the Western world. People are as passionate about politics as they once used to be about God, about religion. And while that's great, it has a certain benefit, but if we are not grounded, again, in our faith and our understanding of faith, as you also, we'll talk about this in a second, as you construct also. I'm just a teacher. I don't expect you to do what I tell you to do. I hope that this is an opportunity for you to explore, even disagree with me, and come to your own conclusions. But at least you put in the effort, right? But to come to your own abilities to think through things through an Islamic perspective. A critical reflection that is rooted in family, faith, and community. So we're going to go through a series of courses together. And ideally what we do is we read 3 texts. And this is something I learned from a teacher from Senegal, as well as in Egypt. This is kind of the system for the masses. No one's going to be a scholar by taking this. Like, we don't want to put scholarship on the table. That becomes terrifying. I just want to know how to practice, and I want to know how to think. And I want to know, most importantly, how do I live? So we're going to go through 3 texts, if you will. First text is going to cover issues of faith. What do we believe on issues? Right? And what were some of the pressing questions that scholars up until now continue to discuss related to theology, especially God and prophets? The second is we'll take a text on Islamic practice, just specifically probably 3 things, not all. So purification, prayer, making sure that we're doing those things correctly. And then the third is tasawwuf, the idea of working on myself, improving my character, being a better person, understanding my emotions, understanding my triggers, getting a stronger grasp of kind of those things, and dilating my capacity to live a purpose-driven life is really what it's about. So this first round, we're going to start with theology. And of course, we should start with theology, because why would I pray if I don't know who I'm praying to? Like, why would I live a good life if I don't believe in what revealed everything? So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the first thing that he begins with is faith. He calls people to Iman. And that's why I say to Aisha, and sometimes we make a mistake with people when we start them with halal and haram. We should start with Iman. Doesn't mean halal and haram isn't important, but we have to differentiate between someone who may know and someone who doesn't know. Someone who has experience and someone who doesn't have experience. That's like being an educator. And the Prophet said, I was sent to educate. And Aisha, she says, as related by Bukhari, that the first thing that the Prophet taught us was heaven and hell and God. And he didn't start with like, don't drink, don't fornicate. And she says, if that is what had been started with, we would have never been able to stop those things. But faith gave them a purpose. Belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed them to transcend things. And sometimes we've all been there where people are just like kind of irrationally barking orders at us. It can become kind of like becomes a task. Whereas for the companions, it was an act of love. It was an act of dedication. So we're going to go through a text. It's a short poem written by a teacher, someone we're going to talk about shortly. But before we jump into that, let's just look kind of at what you can expect. So, and this is available, like if you send it to, I think the IC, they'll send you these things that I'm going to show you right now. So the first is, this course will walk you through the foundations and parameters of Sunni theology. I'm trained in Sunni theology, so that's what I can teach you. It will do so using relied upon sources with the hope that it will encourage you to locate faith as important and an adventure. As a convert to Islam, I see Islam very much as an adventure. You have to perhaps think about this differently. My daughter likes to tell me, she's 20, I'm not a convert, right? This wasn't me. She's like, I'm not crazy about this like you are, right? I was born into this. I had a friend one time, I used to be hard on him when we were young, and he was like, you're the guy who read how to ride a bike. I just know how to ride a bike. I was born Muslim, you learned it. So, I hope that we can, neither of those perspectives are necessarily bad. So I don't want you to think about it like, oh, this is bad and this is good. No, how do we kind of combine, right? A natural kind of organic expression of Islam that comes through family, comes through socialization, comes through nurture. But I want you to always locate your relationship with Allah as an adventure, because like nobody can understand everything about Allah. That's a lifetime process. So instead of locating and positing faith as this intimidating bully that's there to beat me up, right, and always reinforce, there's a place for this. My negative, I want to see like faith is this adventure that actually enriches my life. Like faith really does enrich the way we look at life. An opportunity to address your own questions. The goal of this course is to strengthen your faith, confront your questions, and to find the strength to commit to it, as well as giving you the ability to talk about it. On campus, work, wherever you are, people may have questions, your own family. There may be youth in your communities, maybe some elders want to be educated. You have put yourself in a position where you're literate. I believe in functional religious literacy, not dysfunctional attempts at scholarship. I hate that. Right? We need to function. Allah says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا, those who believe, and then they translate that into action. Let's go through the syllabus for this semester. It's not quite all the way done. So tonight we'll do the introduction, text and overview, introduction, the first obligation, how do we learn? Like, how do we learn about God? Then the next is the Quran, knowing Allah and the marriage of contradictions. How do Muslims believe in a transcendent God who at the same time makes himself known to, how do we believe in a perfect God who makes himself known to imperfect creation. How do you rationalize this? This is a question that early scholars ask. How can I know something is so perfect as someone who has so many imperfections? The Quran's presentation of faith, the meaning of faith, the importance of learning, the foundations of faith, the first obligation, 2 ways we know Allah, 20 qualities that help us understand, see, and believe in Allah. So we're going to talk about these. It's called Sifat Ashri. Then on October 7th, we're going to talk about doubt and transformations. People are always scared to talk about doubts. Normal. What is doubt? So in Islamic theology, we have like different designations of what doubt is. You'll be surprised. So not all doubt is negative, transformative. The terms Islam uses to identify different iterations of doubt, the importance of doubt, addressing doubt, its causes and remedies. Do we need an interdisciplinary approach for ministering to doubts? The world is so complex now. Do we need an interdisciplinary approach? Everybody understand what I mean? Different specialities to address within the community. People have different doubts related to sexuality, related to biology, related to politics, related to philosophy, related to theology, related to race, related to. Now there are so many avenues for doubt. Is it possible that just the imam can handle all this by his or herself? So I believe in an interdisciplinary approach. And I think also this is why our nonprofits continue to fail, because we expect what a nonprofit can't offer. I was an MFA president. I don't know how it is now. But I remember one of my biggest challenges was people thought like I had the keys to the city, man. And I was like, I can't do that. Like there's resources on campus. People get mad at me. I was like, we can't do that. We can't do that. We don't have that ability. So an interdisciplinary approach also brings the community together and brings different talents and backgrounds together to approach some of the challenges that are like popular entry points for doubt. Every era has different entry points for doubt. How do we recognize and then address those? Through an interdisciplinary approach. You don't have to write all this down because we're going to send this to you. Cause of doubts beyond the text. So like, not everything is, a lot of times people come to me with religious doubts, it ends up being something outside of religion. So you're going to have a conversation with them and it's like, my girlfriend broke up with me, man. It's like, God hates me. What does that have to do with you? What does that have to do? Why you got to bring God into it? Right? Why you got to bring God into it? Well, I didn't pass this class. I don't know if I believe in the prophet anymore. Like, how does this work, right? But then you have very real issues where my religious father abused me physically for 15 years. And now you want me to believe in this? And he go to masjid for 5 prayers. Or my husband, who was a religious person, or my wife did something really, really extremely super ratchet. And now I'm supposed to believe in this? That demands investment, because that is very real. And we're not even thinking about this, like at a real level where we help people, man. So doubts beyond the text, from the mundane to the real, beyond worship and beyond the masjid, right? So sometimes those doubts are caused by things that have happened outside, but they're there. How do we address those? And that gets into like restorative justice. That gets into addressing mistakes of the community. Right? BMI is doing a great job of this. Like, how as a Muslim community are we out telling people we're one ummah and we have like a very, very strong problem with color? Like, how do you rationalize this? Like, how do you hold on to faith in a moment like that? So that's why also as we get into the future, I think we have to talk about being a deliberate ummah. Not a, the ummah, alhamdulillah, and then I'm like, have problems with people based on gender, race, and other things. That's not an ummah. An ummah is the outcome of a deliberate process. And we kind of ride the coattails of the early ummah, right? How do we heal from trauma that is, doubt that is induced by trauma? How's that process? What does that look like? We may bring special guests to talk about psychological components, because that's not what I do. Related to intimidation, it didn't have to be even physical abuse. It could have been like mental abuse. I meet a lot of people who say like they heard for years that they're going to hell. They heard for years like, I wish Allah never caused me to have you, or I wish Allah never let me marry you. After a while, man, that stuff starts to get heavy on people, man. And if they couple that with like failures professionally, then they start to believe that stuff. So how do we address that? Then on the 14th, we're going to talk about understanding fate, the problem of pain, in light of God's attributes. The test, not text, the test of success and understanding Allah's plan for us. And two foundations as we journey through life. There's two foundational things we want to think about as we take on success and failure, pain, happiness, and all those kind of things. Then on the 21st, we're going to be talking about jockeying for authority and irresponsible scholarship, who are Ahl Sunnah. You see this all the time. But I remember as a convert, when I was like, Ahl Sunnah, Ahl Sunnah, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. And then at the end of it, I was like, basically 3 people on the face of the earth. It's basically like this really small group of people, right? That's very problematic. So we'll talk about number 1, why al-jama'ah came later. This word al-jama'ah, it was Ahl Sunnah early on. Al-jama'ah comes after the time of Sayyidina Ali. Who are the Salaf? Did the Salaf agree on everything? Oftentimes we're told like, this is the way of the Salaf. You have to be Salaf. What if the Salaf had 14 different opinions on an issue? And you then invoke like an anachronistic kind of theoretical framework to tell me there's only one way? If there are 14 different opinions amongst the Salaf. That can become confusing, especially on TikTok. The role of the Salaf in balancing orthodoxy. The Salaf as an abstraction of silence. What I mean by that is, I remember in Egypt when the Arab Spring started, people began to start because he cut off the internet. It's the first time in my life I ever woke up and everything was shut off. It was like something out of a movie, like the Truman Show, right? My phone didn't work, internet didn't work, radio, only thing he had was state radio. And state radio was like, Kullu shay tamam, alhamdulillah, la bas, everything is fine, don't worry. It's all gravy, it's a beautiful morning, kullu mazboot, right? I was like, oh, okay. I was like, man, this is not a movie, right? And then so that caused everyone to go to Tahrir Square, right? Because they have any information. So then when they did turn on the internet again, but by then it was too late. But one of the the outcomes of this was that immediately people came on the radio like, it was the way of the Salaf not to get involved in, demonstrations. So invoking the Salaf as an abstraction for silence or a motivation to do something. How do we unpack that? How do we understand that? Then we'll talk about our contemporary Salafis, Hanbalis. Compare the two between the Saudi kind of led Salafism, and this is not to attack anyone, it's just to study. We're in a university, right? Where we can compare. How does it stack up to it being an Orthodox Hanbali expression? Are contemporary Salafis even Sunni? It's a very important discussion to have. Or are they their own school, own methodology? If you think about this as a Sunni, who do the Salafis usually encourage you to hate? Our Sunni Imams. If I claim to be on the Boston Celtics, I can't hate Larry Bird. So look at it, it's as a system of sponsored in the Muslim world in the last 200 years. No, it has worked to actively undermine and destabilize Sunni community. So folks on Zoom, if you can get your mute on, because we can hear all your business. What was that social security number again? So how do we compare that? Like, how do we understand that? So that also when you're on TikTok, you're on Instagram, it's trying to work. It's like, you know, it's not what this sort of thing. You're at least able to understand historically where this is coming from, also identify whether this is really something that embodies quote unquote, because see in places where sort of the jihadism is happening, like, they're killed like Shia, they're killed Muslims, killed non-Muslims, and then you find yourself, you're Sunni, you're like put in this position where you have to like, why are Sunnis doing this? Very important question to ask. We'll talk about that as well. The history of erasing texts within contemporary Salafism. Neo-Salafism and the state. So the attitude of Neo-Salafism that you shouldn't rise against the state, just, you know, it's all from God, it's fine. We also find some neo-traditionalists like this too, who say in the name of Sufism, you know, this is what God has decreed. So just take it, be happy that you're being destroyed. How does it stand according to history? How do we look at that from a historical perspective, and how that has undermined the aspirations of many young Arab people, the Arab lands, these two kind of theologies that have worked to support dictatorships and dictatorial autocracy, and then undermine the notion of like rights, independence.
Yeah, hopefully.
Respected and experience some kind of dignity. We'll talk about the Sunni diaspora. There's a Sunni diaspora.
Yeah.
Don't think about it that way. But like, we don't have the same kind of authoritarian structures in the West that you would find, say, in Gambia, in Mali, Nigeria, Egypt, Morocco, in Bosnia, Afghanistan, even places like Malaysia. Like, there is in Malaysia, ain't nobody praying 8 rakat tarawih. Everybody's praying 20. Right? So there's like an authoritarian structure there. In Saudi Arabia, there's an authoritative structure. In America, it's, let me ask TikTok, you know what I'm saying? You know, how many rakat we praying? All right, cool. That's the best video I saw. All right, I'm praying 3.5. Okay, 3.5. The history of the term jama'ah and the term Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Where did that come from? How did that start? What's its historical development, and why it can be problematic? Then on the 28th, we may actually have a special program on the 28th on answering questions about the spooky stuff. We may just do like a special night called the Spooky, where I answer all questions about jinns, devils, shaitan, show you how to do a ruqya. It's not hard, it's not difficult, very easy, nothing weird about it. So we'll see. But as of now, we have two types of texts when it comes to theology. We're going to talk about what is Tawheed, some different early groups, the Mu'tazilites and their understanding of Tawheed, Christianity and Tawheed. It's very important to understand this so that when we go into interfaith events or speaking with different groups, we're able to articulate our position correctly. We don't need to destroy anybody else. That's not what we're doing that, but we want to make sure at least we say what we believe. So understanding what other people believe, it allows us then to make sure that we're being true to our message. Judaism and Tawheed. Sunnis and Tawheed. Mainstream Sunnism framing of Tawheed and the goal of Tawheed. Tawheed means the oneness of God. What's the goal of all that? And its foundations. On the 4th, we're going to talk about prophethood. What is prophethood? Why prophets? Effective education. How many prophets were there? What we believe about the finality of prophethood. Leave Jesus out of it. Muhammad's finality as an immutable belief of Islam. And the problematic contentions of the Ahmadiyya community as well as the Nation of Islam when it comes to the finality of prophet and why we consider them not Muslim. sense of orthodoxy. And also we'll talk about Christianity, especially evangelical, who have this idea like there's prophets now, like the prophets at Whole Foods, prophets at roller skating rink, prophets in Bryant Park, there's like prophets there. That's kind of a problem. And not again to put people on blast, just to be aware of this is where we subtly differ with these different groups. Then on the 11th, because it's going to be close to Christmas, we're going to do a whole thing on Jesus and Islam to prepare ourselves, to equip ourselves. Christmas is coming. We're going to be able to talk about Jesus. He had no J in his name. Be able to talk about that correctly, and then also present the Islamic perspective on Isa alayhi salatu salam. And of course, you can't talk about Isa without talking about his mother.
Molasses.
On the 18th, we'll go back to belief about prophets and sin, the finality of prophethood, rules for interpretation.
Spiritual excellence.
Something called isma.
Spiritual excellence.
We're sinless. What does that mean? How do we understand that? You run into text sometimes wasn't that a sin?
Coal.
But what are the tools needed to interpret those?
You need it.
We'll talk about that. Then we're going to talk about belief in the angels. What are angels? What is their purpose? Do they have utility? How many are there? Can they visit us? Can you meet an angel right now? And the most important angels. Then on the 2nd of December, we're going to talk about belief in books, and I'm going to add the description. And then on the 9th and 10th, we're going to talk about the Quran and the preservation of the Quran. This is going to be divided into two parts. Number one is the Quran and its preservation up until the passing of
Imam Suhaib Webb. Starting a new class today.
Official compilation of the Quran. Second, we're going to talk about the preservation of the Quran after the time of the 4 Khulafa. And I read different qira'at. Today you heard me, I was confusing 2 different qira'at. We'll talk about what are these qira'at? What is the ahruf sab'a? What are the 7 ahruf? What's this? Are there really, as Yasser Qadi says, holes in the narrative? There's absolutely no holes in the narrative. With respect to my colleague, how do we unpack historically the preservation of the Quran so that when you walk away, you're not worried about things? It's a very good thing to think about, and then asking questions. And then we're going to take a break, I believe, for the holidays, and we'll come back, and then we'll pick up and start to talk about what's called a sam'iyat, the unseen, the hereafter, death, heaven, hell. And then we'll finish probably halfway through next semester, and then we'll move on to fiqh, to practice. Any questions about this before we? Yes, and everything that you're seeing now is going to be following a text that we're reading together. So I'll give you the text. It's very simple, and you just keep notes, but these are like the topics that you can expect to learn. Anything I should add? Anything I've forgotten? Yes, sir.
Let's say if you're unable to make one of the lectures working.
You're gonna miss a lecture, bro?
Let's
Stuff.
I'll try not to. Let's say like
I'm out of here, man. I'm done. That's fine. They'll be recorded, and I think the IC will post them on their YouTube page. And believe me, I understand this happens, right? So don't worry, like, oh man, I missed like 2 classes. I'm never coming back. He like hates me. It ain't that important, man. And I'm a parent. I'm still a student, and I know, it happens. There's a lot going on in our life right now, so don't worry about that. So it should be up on the IC YouTube page, yeah. There's also something that I did for you is I made kind of a glossary of the actual text, like a table of contents. And it's not very organized, but also it's not horrible. So if you look at it, if you look at this glossary and you have the poem in front of you, it's going to give you like kind of the themes of each line. So like these are the things you want to be thinking about as you go through the poem that I'm about to show you. And that also will be available to you through the IC. And then that takes us to, and I don't see it here. Yeah, no, I don't think that one's on here. There's only two. Let me add you to this one. Any questions so far about anything? Can you put your email there? And I'll just send it to you. Any questions, thoughts, comments? How are people feeling about this information? Are these the things that sort of interest you? Any comments or thoughts? Yes, sir.
How do you deal with, there are conflicting opinions?
Yeah, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that a lot, like, especially on the issue of the salaf, right? Because there are three Sunni madhabs in theology. It's like you have madhabs in fiqh, which are, you have different schools of thought on issues of theology. And for the most part, they agree on foundations. They differ on secondary issues. They do not differ on anything that would take someone out of Islam. They agree on what makes a person Muslim. That's just it. But we're gonna spend some time talking about that as well. That's why I put in that, if you remember, it's like the irresponsibility of sometimes presenting this as being like, it's like this or you're out, where there may be more than one opinion. Because we don't want to think of theology as simply being anachronistic, right? Being stuck in time. Like till now, there's new issues, there's new questions, and there's new challenges, and there's new answers. So it's going to be that way. The foundations are there, but there's going to be, different kind of opinions and approaches based on certain things. Absolutely. And we'll even see some of the great scholars change. We'll have one approach, and as they grew and they learned and they experienced things, they changed their opinion. Certainly.
Following them doesn't make you incorrect.
Absolutely not, because we'll talk about what's the obligation for you. This is one of the questions we're going to ask. Like me as a normal non-scholar, do I have to know what scholars know to be right? Absolutely not. What's an obligation is to ask. I'm not trained. How am I going to be able to delve into all that? Yes.
Talk about humanities, political diversity, exile, humanitarian crises,
Absolutely.
occupation.
Absolutely. Trauma in general is on there, right? Any kind of traumatic event. And how like I remember in the mid-90s, I was in college and Bosnians began to trickle into the US, coming from like just destructive civil war, where rape was used as a weapon against Muslims. And I remember that, there was a brother that came to the masjid and he was smoking cigarettes. He was from Bosnia. And then some brothers started going off on him about cigarettes. And then we had to sit this brother down and say, like, man, he probably needs nicotine. You know what I mean? The stuff that he's been through, the challenges he's faced, like, this is not where you need to be trying to help this person, regardless of who it was. Like, your approach was wrong, but it's amplified by the fact that this person lost his kids in a war. And the brother got mad and never came back to the masjid. Not the Bosnian guy, the other guy. The Bosnian guy was like, thank you, right? That was very important when we see the sexual abuse stuff happen in the Muslim community in America. And the lack of people coming out and saying, enough is enough, we have to stop this. Like, that's very important for people to heal. Those things have to happen. So yeah, we're going to talk about that in October. So. Great. So one thing I want you to understand is the more you engage and the more you ask questions, the better the class is going to be. You know what I mean? The more that you can challenge, the more that you probe, that makes things much more interesting. So we're going to read just quickly the introduction because of time, and then we'll stop. This is a poem written by someone named Ahmed al-Marzuki. Ahmed Marzuki was from Egypt, lived around 200 years ago. He was born like 6 years after the French occupation of Egypt. The French occupied Egypt for 2 years, and no occupation was more harsh on Egyptians across the board, probably than the French. What they did in 2 years was very destructive. And Ahmed Marzuki, he is from the lineage of Imam al-Hassan. And his grandfather was a great, great scholar in Egypt, a great Sufi. He had more than 85 what are called Zawiya, like spiritual centers across Egypt. So if you're from West Africa, his grandfather is like a mini version of Ahmed Bamba. Not that big, but powerful, like has an influence on people. Sheikh Ahmed Marzuki lived in Minya, and what we understand from his life, I heard from his great grandson, who I studied this text with, was that he was really concerned about public education. Right? How do you educate the public? Like, you had this kind of scholarly class of people, that's great, but like, how do we think about the masses? There's a great story about him that, in Egypt, when he used to go every day and teach in the Azhar Mosque, which was like a university at that time, he would take a donkey guy. This guy with a donkey, you pay him. It's like an Uber, but it's a donkey. So you do like the Duber, right? Which means the back in Arabic. So you ride the donkey to Azhar. And then the guy would stay with you all day long and then take you back. So the people who used to do those donkey things, they were known as being illiterate people. We used to make fun of them. Say, al-himar mal-himar, like a rough state. So one day, after like 10 years of this, people noticed the donkey guys were debating theology, quoting poetry, talking about Abdul Qadir Jailani, Ghazali, this and this and this. People are like, what the heck, man? You guys talk about donkeys. Where did you learn this? He said, I'm the Sheikh. So Sheikh Ahmed Marzuki, when he would ride to Azhar, first he would just review his notes, and then the guy would start to ask him questions. So then he realized this is an opportunity to be a public educator. And if I can educate the people who are the most mistreated in society, I can educate anybody. So you find kind of this approach throughout his life. He moves to Egypt. He became the mufti in Mecca. He became the mufti in Mecca. He was, known for being like a decent person, serving the people when they would come for Hajj, looking after the needs of people. And then he passed away in Mecca. The text that we're reading, he wrote, is called The Masses Creed. It's a poem that gives you the foundations that you need to know as a Muslim related to Sunni theology. Is it? Pretty bare bones text. So we'll just read the introduction and then we'll stop, inshallah. He says, Abda'u bismillahi wa birrahimi, Abda'u bismillahi wa rahmani wa birrahimi da'im al-ihsani. He says, I begin with the name of Allah, the most merciful. Of course, you see he's emulating the Quran. Abda'u bismillahi wa rahmani wa birrahimi da'im al-ihsani. I begin this effort, I begin this poem with the names of Allah, meaning seeking, here it means seeking Allah's barakah, the barakah of those names, the blessing of those names. And that's a great lesson for you and I in anything you want to do professionally. Start with Allah. Sayyidina Sulaiman, when he sent that letter to Bilqis, innahu min Sulaiman, innahu bismillahir rahmanir rahim. It's from Sulaiman, and indeed it begins with Allah. The word ba is often translated as in, like I believe in God. I believe in the angels. But actually the word ba there, when you say amantu billah, I believe in God, it's not what it means. It means with. Because in Islam, we believe in the idea of musahaba, to worship Allah as though you see him, even though he can't see you. So if faith is in, that restricts it simply to theoretical abstractions. That becomes like calculus. But when faith is with, that implies whether I'm isolated like Yunus in the belly of a fish, whether I'm ostracized like Yusuf at the bottom of a cave, whether I'm burning under the pressure that Sayyidina Ibrahim faced in society, whether I have to stand up to justice like Prophet Musa, whether I have to call people to living a better life like Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, I'm with Allah. So that now kind of expands this understanding of faith that we're going to talk about next week. That it's not just a set of things and rules, it's about a presence. That I make good decisions. When I first became Muslim, we had this friend of mine, we became Muslim together. He's a little wild, you know, country people, Oklahoma. That's my boy though. But like, you know, we had some challenges, man. New Muslim, still got some attachments. So he would actually come to the Quran class blazed. So we can smell it, you know. We're all recovering blazers. We're trying, he was high on marijuana. So we're trying to read Quran and we're like, dang man, chocolate tie. No. Sticky icky. Right, like, what the heck? So first we thought we were like freaking out, like we thought it was one of the brothers in the masjid. We were like, man, stuff a lot. You know, converts here now. We know you're dirt. So then I realized, you know, it was him. I said, no man, you come into like the Sheikh's class, blaze, bro. The whole purpose of the class is to put out the blaze. He's like, man, you know, I just can't stop. You know what I'm saying? I just can't stop. So I fully appreciate that. I can't wait to go to Jannah. But why don't you ask the Sheikh? Sheikh was from St. Louis, Nevada. It's like, no, man, Sheikh don't know nothing about weed, blah, blah, blah. I said, just ask the Sheikh, man. So we asked the Sheikh, Sheikh Ahmed Diaye. So Sheikh, I got to talk to you. And the Sheikh was like, I knew the whole time, subhanAllah. But my hope was that eventually you'll be more high on the Quran than high on this. Right? That the Quran will transform you. So keep coming. He told me, just keep coming. Like, don't worry, keep coming. Even though it smells bad. Just keep coming, brother. Then get tawifi. Come sit over here. Then one day he started crying. We're reading Surah Al-Waqi'ah. He started crying. It's like, Sheikh, I just can't stop. So, you know, we can all relate. We're all new to this newer game. So Sheikh said, I know one thing that will help you stop. He said, what? He said, brother, next time you want to light that thing, say Bismillah. Say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So immediately the brother whose name shall not be said, he's like, Sheikh, if I do that, I won't smoke. Sheikh said, exactly. Don't say A'udhu Billah. Say Bismillah. And they were like, don't say Alhamdulillah either, bro. Say Bismillah. He's like, how can I do that with Allah? He said, trust me, if you start doing this, and then we're going to find you some help, you know, get you in touch with some support. So over time, alhamdulillah, there's never like a perfect ending, but over time he was able, especially once he got married, his wife was like, oh no, Bismillah, I'm about to let you have it. But he did say that forced him to be put into a place of greater consciousness. It centers you. When we remember Allah, we're centering ourselves. So the Sheikh, he begins, Abda'u Bismillahi أبدأ بسم الله والرحمن والرحيم دائم الإحسان. Then he mentions that Allah دائم الإحسان. This is a belief that we have that no matter what happens, good or bad, there's always something good in it. We'll talk about that in the future. So what he's doing here, this is a way of the old scholars that they are alluding to the subject in the introduction. They didn't have a lot of paper. So your table of contents had to be in your opening bars. you had to let people know what you were talking about. So this is like a classic form of writing in the Muslim world. Bara'atul istidlal, where I'm telling you, I'm hinting what the subject is. So if I said like, Abda'u bi Kendrick wa bidriki, wa BJ Cody, sahibul Nike, right? And you know, I'm going to talk about hip hop. Abda'u bi Librani wa Kobe, right? Wa Tatum, thumma Brown, thumma Celtiki, right? You know that what I'm talking about is, who knows? Basketball, right? It's called Barat Istidlal. That will be Fortnite, will be called a duty. واختلف بين PS2 و Xbox, right? It's a very way, by the way, this way of poetry is called Rajaz. It's very simple. I'm doing it now. It's very simple just to flow with it. It's like the auto tool of poetry, in the sense that it's a very simple, there's 13 or 16 according to some different ways of composing poetry in Arabic. This is called Himar al-Shu'ara, the donkey of poets, because anyone can do it. Mustaf'ilun, mustaf'ilun, mustaf'il. Qala Suhaib Webb, huwa Oklahomi. It's like very simple. Why did he do all that? Because the goal of the text is for people at that time who couldn't read. So now you learn something from his approach. I'm making you laugh and it's funny, but there's something deep there. And that is, get to the people. It's not sufficient just to be like the academic that sits behind the wall and publishes and gets reviewed in academic journals, and people in the streets are dying and don't have education and need to learn and are getting played by a system that uses ignorance as a way to hurt them. Sheikh is like, no, I'm going to write this poem that teaches deep, heavy stuff in the simplest way possible, so that the donkey people will be like understanding their creed. So he says, Abda'u bismillahi wa rahmani wa birrahimi da'im al-ihsani alhamdulillahi musalli ala falhamdulillahi al-qadim al-awwali. And he says, then praise be to Allah al-qadim al-awwal, the one who has no beginning, the one who has no end. Al-akhir al-baqi bila tahawwuri. So he says, Alhamdulillah al-qadim al-awwal, praise be to Allah who has no beginning. Al-akhir al-baqi bila tahawwur, and who has no ending and doesn't go through changes. God doesn't change, because change is something that is part intrinsic to the material world. That's beyond that. So again, here's the allusion to the topic. Topic is God. And one of the things you're going to learn from this class is like, our scholars weren't like barbarians. This is something that the Eurocentric West tried to put into our minds, right? As Muslims. And many of you, I'm white, so I didn't have to deal with it necessarily from that cultural angle, but religiously I had to. But it's very important that you don't buy into the dominant narrative, man. That you go and seek and learn about people and places and even visit and travel. And then you realize, man, I got played. So here you see something, that this is a very deliberate person. Like this is an attempt to write in a way that's not easy to write. It's a poem, so that means he's a person of letters. He's not only a sheikh, he can write. And not only can he write, he got bars. So he says, Alhamdulillah al-qadim al-awwali al-akhir baqi bila tahawwur. Means Tawheed, oneness of God. And he says, ثُمَّ الصَّلَاةُ وَالسَّلَامُ سَرْمَدًا. Then peace and blessings always. عَلَى النَّبِيِّ خَيْرِ مَنْ قَدْ وَحَّدَ. Upon the Prophet, the best wahada, who recognized the oneness of God. Again, alluding to the topic. The one who knew God's oneness the best is the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. وَآلِهِ, his family, وَصَحْبِهِ وَمَنْ تَبِعَ, and whoever follows. سَبِيلَ دِينَ الْحَقِّ غَيْرَ مُبْتَدِعٍ, who follows the path, the right path of Islam, and does not commit innovation. Again, alluding to the idea of orthodoxy, alluding to the idea of these are foundational beliefs. Every line of this poem has a verse of Quran to support it. Then as we stop, we begin, line 5 is really where the poem starts. He says, وَبَعْدْ فَعْلَمْ بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ. Before he talks about God, he talks about the primary obligation. This is called the primary obligation. The majority of mainstream Sunni theologians consider this as the first obligation upon any human being. What do you think it is? This is very important, man. When you're around, non-Muslim relatives, man, they always try to sneak little shots. Some of them are atheists, so it's like, religion is like the mother load of bad ideas, blah, blah, blah. So you got to kind of equip yourself, because passion can only take you so far. I can be passionate about something, but if I'm not able to bring some kind of burhan, some kind of support to that passion, it doesn't last long. So according to the majority of Sunni theologians, outside of a small minority, the first obligation upon a person is to think. Dang, really? The first obligation is to think, to know, to learn. So that's why he says, وَبَعْدُ فَعْلَمْ. To proceed, you must know بِوُجُوبِ الْمَعْرِفَةِ, that knowledge is wajib, wujub. And here doesn't mean wajib like in fiqh. Wajib means I have to. So this is the first obligation. We're going to talk about it next week. And it's also very liberating to know this, because if the first obligation is to learn and think, then how do we teach people theology? How are we teaching people in Islamic schools? Are we encouraging questioning? Are we encouraging investigation? Are we encouraging people to engage so that they can come to conclusions, or are we intimidated? Religious education, and this happened to me when I was a kid in the church. I was told one time, I was like, so if Jesus is God, I asked in the church, I got in big trouble. If Jesus is God, then what about the prophets who came before him who didn't worship Jesus? Who did they worship? And this lady, she was, God bless her, volunteer. She was like, that question is from the devil. I was like, dang, man, 12 years old getting called a devil. Right, that's a great feeling. So how do we reverse that, right? Where we see people's questions, inquisitiveness is actually in line with this idea that the first obligation is to learn, not to be quiet. And we have a great axiom as we finish that says whatever leads to an obligation became obligatory. So whatever leads to a person learning then also becomes an obligation. If learning is an obligation, then the resources needed to accomplish that obligation become obligatory. So we have to think about having professional colleges for religious teachers in Muslim high schools, because that's going to help people reach that obligation. You have to think about having guidance counselors in mosques and in Islamic schools that can help people deal with traumatic experiences in their life. There has to be, as I talked about earlier, an interdisciplinary approach to this issue to help us achieve excellence. Being an Islamic studies teacher should be a viable career option for people. Not one where it's like, yeah, I teach like 12 hours a day, then I go home and drive Uber all night so I can survive. How are you going to attract people? How are you going to bring in the best of the best if at 15 they're Bitcoin mining and already cashing? You know what I'm saying? You're giving them like 20K a year with no insurance. So that first line, if we had time, we don't, we begin to unpack it is, and that's going to be our discussion. We come back next week with you. We're going to start with the discussion is, what do you see as essential to learning and to being in a situation where you can learn? What are the ingredients of religious learning? So what would be those things that trigger learn? Like you mentioned earlier, being able to heal from trauma. Okay, that's a step to learning. What else? So as we finish now, the very first obligation in Islamic theology according to the majority, is to know. The minority, this is the followers of Ibn Taymiyyah, we find this now amongst contemporary Salafis, they say the first obligation is to say La ilaha illallah. The response to that is a parrot can say La ilaha illallah. But Allah says in the Quran, فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ لَا إِلَهَ. You must know that there's no God. They also have strong evidences now, don't get me wrong. But I agree with the former, that's what I'm trained in, is I got to know what I'm saying, man. I have to be able to understand and think about what I'm saying. And then also that tells us what was the job of prophets? It's to be teachers, to facilitate learning. So the first, and this is going to be good for you. So next time you watch him do Mahar, Bil Mahar, when you're watching him and he has on one of the news like atheists, and they're like, Islam is like anti-intellectual. Islam is a motherload of bad ideas. Right? You can say to them, well, according to mainstream Sunni theologians, first obligation is to thank buddy. Looks like you got it wrong. Are you projecting? Are you projecting your post-enlightenment European experience on us? I think that's what you're doing. Why are you getting nervous? But that's how you respond to this, because you can quote a text. So, well, I actually learned this. I sat down and studied this. This is what I found. So that's what I meant about how the book will also give you subtle tools, subtle equipment to push back. And not just passionate. No, that's not Islam. That's not what Islam. We always do that. That's not Islam. How do you know it's not Islam? Someone start to make us play defense. We're going to run a 2-3-2. We're going to run a man to man. We're going to run a press. Or we're just going to run. Because that's what passion does. Passion only allows us just to like, that's just not Islam. I know it's not. It's not an answer, man. When I be able to say, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Ashir, Al-Ash'ari, Maturidi, Al-Baqilani, Imam Al-Haramain, Rabi Al-Adawiyya, God bless her. All these famous theologians and the Quran and Hadith say the first thing you got to do is learn. All right, that's what we say. And then you can say, are you trying to appropriate our theology and speak on our behalf? Then you start to make them play defense. Because that's what happens. And I've always thought it interesting that all the atheists are these really cute white men. Right? Nobody wants to break that down. Because they can talk about all the cultures in the world, all the philosophies in the world, all the religions in the world, all the ethnicities in the world. I have a problem with that. But again, in that, I want to be able to give beef. So we'll stop here. We'll usually take 1 hour only, but today is the first day. Next week, inshallah, we're going to continue. If you sign up at the ICNYU, they're going to send you the syllabus. And next week, we're going to talk about this first obligation. We're going to talk about how the Quran presents faith. In the beginning, the importance of learning, the foundations of faith, the obligation. First obligation, we're going to talk about what does learning mean? There's a great scholar from Morocco, Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, actually from Andalus, like wrote about what does it mean to learn about faith. I'm going to think about like comparing that to like now how do we learn about faith? Right? What would Al-Qadi Abu Bakr say to like a 30-second TikTok clip that may be coming just from anybody? We don't even know who that person is. Might be good, might be bad. But how would you, they're really where I want to take something so important from. And then, of course, we're going to break up next week and have this discussion. I'll have a better question for you, like, what are the steps to effective religious education? Right? What are those processes where I can achieve, functional religious literacy? Any questions before we let everybody go? Yes, Wafa?
Like in terms of learning, like how do you know like what sources to use, what to believe, like what not to believe?
Yeah, so we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about that. Remember this section here on jockeying for authority and irresponsible scholarship. Most of the times when I see people saying, it's like, it's only one way. I know there's 3 different things. I'm like, why are you telling people this, man? Then you create like this puritanism where there doesn't need to be any. There's actually like, someone came to Imam Ahmad and said, I wrote a book called The Book of Differences. He said, no, call it the Book of Rahmah. Call it the Book of Mercy. There are certain things that we're going to go through in this text which we don't bend on. Like Prophet Muhammad is the final prophet. You know, we believe in hell, we believe in heaven. You know, those are things that are non-negotiable. So as we go through this course, and I think it's important to realize this is not a French press. This course is this is like a pour over. Takes a little time. That's a great question. That's around the corner, Wafa. Thank you for asking. Any other questions or comments, thoughts? So I do this to my daughter all the time. She hates me for it, but that's why I love her. What was the most important thing you heard tonight? That's how you make people talk, right? He's like, so how was it? Any questions? Like, no, I'm good. But let me ask a question that needs an answer. So what is the most important thing you heard, or the thing that most interested you that you heard this evening? Yes, Wafa.
I think when you were talking about how the author like wrote the poem in like a simple language so it like reach like the donkey.
Absolutely.
You know, he didn't use like any complicated terms or like that, or like to make himself like sound smart, like trying to reach like people lower.
Or people that have been, you know, I like to use the word people who have been ostracized from education, right? People who didn't have access. Exactly. Anyone who read The Wretched of the Earth? We call you should read The Wretched of the Earth, right? Sheikh is worried about the wretched of the earth. Let's think about this now critically after 9/11. There are certain Muslim communities, one I became Muslim through, most of them now are very old now, Allah bless them. They were making dawah to people on the streets, like in the people in the country too. Like, they were making dawah to the masses. After 9/11, where has the dawah shifted to? Exclusively. Honestly, is it shifted towards just like people at the Met Gala? Is that like our object? Like as a community after 9/11, I would argue that a lot of our dawah was no longer concerned about the poor, no longer concerned about systemic issues of race. We all sit on the shoulders of Malcolm. I live on 125th Street. Right? That's sacred for me. That's sacred ground. Right? There's the blood of a martyr on that ground. Right? Are we living up to that, or is it about being close to celebrities, getting invited to the White House, being in the government? Right? Am I a lifetime appointee in the Beltway, or is it just for one term? That's not prophetic. There's a place for that. Don't get me wrong. God bless people who do that. But if we're serious about like taking on challenges of this country, there's no more liberating thing that we can give than La ilaha illallah. That's what we see like in MIB, in Harlem. You should visit Masjid Taqwa. You should visit Pop Smoke. You know, he was buried in Masjid Khalifa. That's where they did his janazah. People went there because they did his janazah there. What about other people's janazahs that were there? You know what I mean? Like, what moves us now is access to broader society. God bless him, rahimahullah. Or is it just about like, I'm worried about people. I care about people, regardless of the situation. We kind of lost that. When I accepted Islam, it was a crazy story. Sheikh Abdurrahman, who was from Brooklyn, but at that time in Oklahoma, he was like, here's some pamphlets. I was like, I've just been Muslim for a week, man. I was like, what do I do with these? He's like, go talk to somebody in the flea market. He's like, take this incense, take the Jannah for those and the Somali rose oil, sell it, and talk to people. I was like, talk to him about what? He's like, talk to him about Allah. So I saw the end of that era of a community that was like, we're going for people. They kicked him out of the prison system as a chaplain because the entire prison took Shahada with him. So like, there'll be no other work for the other chaplains because there's no other Muslims, right? He was like, all I said was Fatiha. You know what I mean? I just said Fatiha, and they were like, boom, the whole prison, right? That in seeing Islam as a transformative, powerful expression, not a cultural relic. It's very different. So yeah, that doesn't mean also people that are calling Joe Biden to the truth. God bless you, but that's not the only thing we should be doing. We each have a role to play. For example, my relative, God bless her, on my brother-in-law's side, she got COVID. She's like 70, serving because she's from Afghanistan. All these refugees come into this country, didn't have anyone translate for them, even though she had been vaccinated, so her sickness wasn't bad. She got COVID. But like, that's her place. Like that, yeah. I can't do that. I don't speak Dari. Right? So we each have different roles to play in power. But I feel like after 9/11, it became about being sanctioned by broader America. That makes us suspect as a prophetic. There's a balance that needs to be there. What else? Anything else? Inshallah. It's late. Jazakallah khairan. So next week, inshallah, we'll continue. And we'll break up into discussion groups for a little while also on this issue of what are the steps towards facilitating good religious education. And then we'll jump back into the text and begin going through. Syllabus, if you don't have access to the syllabus, thank ICNYU to sign up and they'll get it to you. And thanks we have Soraya for helping tonight. I really appreciate it. Barakallahu feekum. And if you meet people like, oh, I missed the first one, I can't come, I always repeat. Right, so like they don't need to worry about that. Jazakumullahu khairan wa sallallahu alaihi wa sallam.